drink coffee. I never have and I never will. Because coffee is not healthy. It severely dehydrates the body.
So is coffee dehydrating? Well, first we have to delineate between coffee and caffeine. Caffeine does technically have potential to be dehydrating. But when it's put to the test, it does not actually seem to be dehydrating. And I'll kind of just let the name of this study give you all the information that you need. And it's very important that they show that their data showed no differences in hematological or urinary markers of hydration status. And this was specifically more prevalent in someone who is caffeine habituated, meaning that the longer you've been ingesting caffeine for, the less dehydrating effects it will have. So someone who is considered caffeine naive or does not use caffeine on a regular basis may find a more significant increase in urinary output when drinking caffeine, or consuming it via a powder, a pill, or in chocolate. And now the reason that caffeine could potentially be dehydrating is because it binds to adenosine receptors on our kidneys. Actually, multiple different adenosine receptors on the kidneys. Some are responsible for increasing urine output, and some are responsible for actually the reabsorption of water. And at the end of the day, it does not appear that the effects of caffeine are dehydrating. Additionally, because almost all the time you are intaking caffeine, it is in the form of a liquid, you are likely going to be drinking back any potential liquid that you may lose. With that being said, one of the adenosine receptors does increase sodium excretion, so you may want to take just a very minor amount of sodium alongside a caffeinated beverage. And other electrolytes found in something like sea salt could also be beneficial. However, it doesn't appear that caffeine is dehydrating, especially if you are caffeine habituated. With that being said, I want you to watch the rest of this video, and I have a few other statements to make.
It extremely messes with the adrenals, which puts the body in a fight or flight mode. It pushes the body into a state where it cannot properly process and function. When you get down to the deep-rooted cause of why you're so tired, why you need mental stimulation, or why you're drinking coffee, then you don't need to put a Band-Aid over your health. It extremely messes with the adrenals, which puts the body in a fight or flight mode. It pushes the body into a state where it cannot properly process and function.
So there are many claims that caffeine is going to mess with our adrenals. But messing with the adrenals isn't really a term for anything. Yes, caffeine does have an effect of increasing the output of adrenaline and cortisol from the adrenal gland. However, other very healthy things do the exact same thing, such as sunlight exposure and, importantly, exercise. And when this caffeine is ingested in the morning, this large increase in cortisol actually reduces our cortisol levels that night. And again, this is one of the reasons that a morning exercise session or morning sunlight exposure can actually better our sleep later that night. So we don't necessarily need to be worried about caffeine. Additionally, this increased level of adrenaline and cortisol actually allows us to liberate stored glycogen, which is the storage form of glucose, and stored triglycerides into free fatty acids in the bloodstream, and this is the storage form of fat. This means there's more energy available in the bloodstream. And if we then proceed to do an exercise session or simply increase our movement throughout the day, then caffeine can actually aid in the reduction of body fat. You see, cortisol and adrenaline may actually be bad things when they're from mental stressors. And they're also negative when they're floating in the bloodstream but we're not being active. Because when there's an increased level of fatty acids in the bloodstream and we're not using them for fuel, we will just restore these fatty acids back into fat tissue. However, it appears that the restorage of fatty acids occurs more inside of the visceral fat, which is the fat surrounding our organs, because there are more cortisol receptors in this location. And another thing that cortisol does is increase the uptake of fuel from the bloodstream. So the increased fuel availability and the increased uptake at the level of the visceral fat means that when we have high cortisol in response to a mental stress, and the muscles don't have an increased demand for energy, the muscles are not going to take these fatty acids out of the bloodstream. Rather, they're going to be stored in the visceral fat area. And this visceral fat is the unhealthy type of fat. But I think we're conflating a cortisol and adrenaline release in response to a mental stress with the cortisol and adrenaline release that allows caffeine to increase our exercise capacity and increase our overall activity throughout the rest of the day. So yes, if you're drinking caffeine and you're simply just sitting there doing nothing, then it may have a small bit of potential to have adverse consequences. But since for most people caffeine makes them more active, this increase in cortisol and adrenaline does not throw off their adrenal gland or their hormone balance. Rather, it increases their physical and mental capacity throughout the rest of the day. With that being said, there is one statement that I full-heartedly agree with.
When you get down to the deep-rooted cause of why you're so tired, why you need mental stimulation, or why you're drinking coffee, then you don't need to put a band-aid over your health.
I do agree with the fact that a lot of people are using caffeine as a band-aid for poor lifestyle habits. Some people actually need to do this, such as bodybuilders trying to get down to an extremely low body fat, because they don't have any physical energy in the form of a high caloric intake, but their sole goal is to get as lean as possible and technically to eat as little as they require. Then caffeine can provide them with mental energy and the perception of high energy stores, allowing them to keep their physical and mental output higher than it would be without the caffeine, which allows them to get leaner than they would have otherwise. But this is typically for a period of time right before the show. But many people are using caffeine as a crutch to keep their energy levels normal throughout the day. And this is typically due to a micronutrient deficient diet. So yes, I think if you need 200 milligrams of caffeine to function, then maybe you should look at the deep-rooted issue. But if you're still sensitive to caffeine, and that 200 milligrams gives you greater mental and physical performance than you could achieve otherwise, then caffeine is simply a beneficial tool for increasing cognitive and physical output. And if you want to learn more how to both feel and look great at the same time, just send me a DM or comment below and we'll set up a consultation.